The storm had been coming since dawn, boiling up from the southern horizon like a wall of bruised sky, and by the time Jed Carver finished mending the northern fence line, the air was thick enough to taste. Rain would be welcome on this land. It always was, but the wind that came before it brought with it things a man didn't want to meet, and Jed knew enough to head for home before the dark came down. Yet it was halfway across the barren stretch by Dead Man's Wash that he saw her. A figure hunched at the base of a split boulder, a threadbare blanket wrapped so tight around her it seemed like she might disappear inside it, her head bowed, her dark hair tangled and wet, her breathing ragged even from 20 yards away. Jed slowed his horse, eyes scanning for the signs of an ambush, because no lone soul sat out here unless trouble had put them there, but there was nothing. No tracks but hers, no gleam of metal in the rocks. Just the sound of the wind and the low moan of someone who'd run out of time. He dismounted slow, boots crunching on the gravel, one hand on the rifle slung over his shoulder, and when she lifted her face, he saw she was young. Maybe 20. But with eyes so hollowed by fear and pain they looked older than his own, and her lips barely moved when she whispered, "Just kill me fast," as if death would be the kindest thing she could hope for. The words stopped him cold. Not because he hadn't heard them before, but because there was no bargaining in them, no last thread of hope. And when he asked what happened, she didn't answer. Just pushed the bundle toward him with trembling hands, the blanket shifting as she did, something heavy and oddly shaped within, and for a breath Jed thought it might be a baby, the way she cradled it, but the weight in his hands felt wrong. No warmth, no small movements, and then the smell hit him, copper and rot beneath the wet wool, turning his stomach even before he pulled the edge back. What he saw made him stumble 2 steps into the rain, the breath catching in his throat. Inside was a human head, pale and bloodless, the eyes open and staring glassy into nothing, the mouth slack, and though the skin had already begun to change under the weather's touch, Jed knew the face. Sheriff Eli Gaines, a man with 30 years of law under his badge, last seen alive 3 days ago riding to meet the territory's governor about some land dispute with the cattle baron Tate Hanlon. Jed swallowed hard, glancing at the girl, but she was watching him with that same empty hopelessness, like the sight of the head was only confirmation of the doom already waiting for them both. She told him her name, Sarah Lee, and in short, halting bursts she told him the rest. She'd been in town when the sheriff returned from his meeting, only to be stopped in the street by his own deputies, men who pulled him from the saddle and took him into the jailhouse. She didn't know what was said, but an hour later they carried him out, headless, and she knew enough to understand Tate Hanlon had bought the law, root and branch. They'd seen her watching, and instead of killing her on the spot, they'd wrapped the sheriff's head in her blanket and told her to ride south to deliver it to Hanlon's foreman. A message that no man, lawman or not, could stand against him, but she'd run instead, ditching her horse to hide her trail, stumbling into the desert where heat and hunger had nearly finished her before Jed found her. Jed knew the kind of men Hanlon kept. Killers who laughed at murder. And he also knew if this was true, there wasn't a badge in the county worth trusting. The smart thing was to walk away, leave the girl to her fate, but Jed had never been good at the smart thing when the wrong thing was easier. And when the thunder cracked overhead and the first sheets of rain began to fall, he made his choice. He wrapped the head tight again, stuffed it into his saddlebags, pulled Sarah onto his horse, and turned north toward his ranch, the wind at their backs and the smell of death following. The ride was slow. She was too weak to sit a saddle without swaying, and twice he had to stop to catch her before she slid off. But by nightfall they reached the line shack at the edge of his land, and he carried her inside, laid her by the fire, and fed her the last of his jerky while the rain hammered the roof. She ate little, her eyes flicking often to the saddlebags, and when she slept, it was with the twitching of someone chased in dreams. Jed didn't sleep at all, because in the distance, beneath the sound of the storm, he thought he heard horses, faint, but steady, like men who knew where they were going. At dawn, the clouds broke to a sky too bright, and Jed saw them for sure. 5 riders on the far ridge, headed toward the shack, their silhouettes black against the sun. There was no time to run for town, so he saddled the horse, got Sarah up, and rode hard for the canyons west, where the trails twisted like a snake's path and only a fool or a desperate man would follow. The riders came fast, rifles flashing in the morning light, bullets kicking dust at their heels, and Jed's mount stretched into a dead run, leaping rocks, splashing through shallow creeks, each turn in the canyon cutting the view but never the sound of pursuit. Sarah clung to him, whispering that they wouldn't stop, not while she breathed, and Jed told her then what he hadn't dared think. That if they made it to the next county, there was an old army post where his brother served, and maybe there they could put the truth into the hands of someone not already bought. The chase lasted hours, until the canyons spat them out onto a wide stretch of sage plain, and in the distance, Jed could see the old fort's flag whipping in the wind. But between them and safety were the riders, having split and circled ahead, cutting off the way. The fight that followed was short but brutal, Jed dropping 2 before the rest broke, leaving their dead in the dust. And when it was over, Sarah slid from the saddle, shaking, and told him he didn't understand. The head wasn't just a warning, it was proof. The governor himself had promised to side with Hanlon if the sheriff was removed, and she'd overheard enough to know the takeover of the territory was set to happen in days. Jed felt the weight of the saddlebags as if it were an iron chain, but he also knew that without them, Hanlon's reach would be complete, and so, bloodied and worn, they rode into the fort as the sun bled out across the horizon, the captain there swearing to send word east to the marshals who still had some honor left. As for Hanlon, Jed knew this wasn't over, men like that didn't forgive, but when Sarah looked at him with something like hope breaking through the exhaustion, he knew he'd make the ride again 100 times if it meant keeping that spark alive. And if you believe the West was built on grit, loyalty, and the stubborn refusal to bow to evil, then saddle up with us. Subscribe now, because the stories aren't over, and every next one will take you deeper into the dust, the danger, and the fight for what's right.